You loved him, fully, deeply. You gave everything: your time, your presence, your laughter, your softness. There wasn't a moment you weren't available. You texted first. You forgave quickly. You stayed, even when staying chipped away at parts of you that no one else could see. And then, something shifted. Not in anger, not in bitterness, but in clarity. One day, you stopped. You didn't reach out. You didn't ask why. You didn't chase. You simply became quiet. And that silence, it was louder than any argument. Because suddenly he noticed the absence, the stillness, the space where your energy used to live. At first, he might not have reacted. Maybe he thought you were just having a bad day. But then came the realization something was different, something was missing. You were missing. Why is it that only when you step back do they begin to see you clearly? Why does your silence shake them more than your words ever could? Why does a man only begin to feel your worth when it's no longer being handed to him without effort? Because silence, when rooted in self-respect, becomes a mirror. It reflects everything he's been avoiding about himself. Your presence used to comfort him, fill in the gaps he never admitted were there. But when you disappear not as a punishment, but as a reclaiming of your own worth, is forced to meet those empty places alone. It's not manipulation. It's not a strategy. It's the purest form of truth. When you withdraw with peace, when you stop begging to be seen, you become undeniable. You become unforgettable. Carl Jung once said, "What you do not make conscious will rule your life, and you will call it fate." And in love, we often become unconscious placeholders for another person's unhealed parts. He wasn't just drawn to you because of who you were. He was drawn because of what you represented in his inner world. But here's the truth. When you walk away, he doesn't just lose you. He loses the part of himself he wasn't brave enough to face. That's the regret. That's the weight he will carry long after you've gone quiet. Not because you shouted, not because you fought, but because you left with grace. And grace, when given freely then withdrawn completely, becomes the loudest echo in a man's mind. So now the question becomes, what happens when you stop trying to be everything for someone and start being everything for yourself? Let's find out. Here's the brutal truth no one tells you. Sometimes, a man doesn't fall in love with you. He falls in love with what you represent inside himself. That's not your fault. That's psychology. Carl Jung called it projection. When we meet someone who unconsciously reflects a missing or hidden part of us, we feel drawn, often obsessively. He may believe he loves you, but in reality, he's loving a part of himself that has been suppressed, forgotten, or never developed. You're not just a person in his life. You're a mirror. This mirror is what Jung described as the anima, inner feminine image that every man carries within his unconscious. She's not real. She's an archetype formed through early emotional experiences, childhood impressions, and inherited ideals about femininity. When a woman enters his life who seems to reflect this anima, something ignites. It's magnetic. He's not just seeing you, he's seeing something ancient, something symbolic. You awaken his longing, his vulnerability, his creativity, his chaos. Everything he doesn't consciously embrace about himself, he sees in you, and it moves him. But here's the dangerous part. That connection isn't built on true understanding. It's built on fantasy. A projection is not about who you really are. It's about who he needs you to be in order to feel whole. And as long as you stay in that role, everything feels perfect. Until, inevitably, it doesn't. Because you're human. You change. You show your complexity. You get tired. You want more. And the moment you step outside the frame of the fantasy, when you stop being the perfect reflection of what he's missing, he begins to pull away. Not because you did something wrong, but because reality broke the spell. Now let's add another layer. Jung's theory of the shadow. Every person has a shadow, self, those aspects of the psyche we reject, suppress, or deny. Our fears, insecurities, wounds, impulses. The shadow is everything we don't want to admit lives inside us. And when we're unwilling to face it within ourselves, we inevitably project it onto others. So when you show up in his life, giving generously, loving deeply, expressing your heart, you also unknowingly awaken his shadow. Your emotional availability might highlight his emotional avoidance. Your stability might expose his chaos. Your need for connection might uncover his fear of intimacy. And instead of meeting that with awareness, he may start to feel suffocated, overwhelmed, or even repelled. That's the irony. The more you show up, the more he is forced to confront the very parts of himself he spent his life avoiding. And when that confrontation becomes too much, he detaches. He convinces himself that the problem is you, that you're too much, too emotional, too intense. But in truth, it's not about you at all. It's about what you activate inside him and his lack of readiness to deal with it. And here's where things get really unfair. As women, we're conditioned to take responsibility for the emotional tone of relationships. So, when he pulls away, when he ghosts, when he becomes cold, the immediate question you ask is, what did I do wrong? But the more accurate question might be, what part of himself did he see in me that he wasn't ready to face? Imagine a man who has suppressed his emotional vulnerability for years. He meets you someone open, expressive, emotionally intelligent. At first, it feels like magic. Finally, someone who makes him feel safe. But then, slowly, that feeling of safety becomes discomfort. Not because you changed, but because your presence demands that he change. Your love becomes a mirror, and he starts seeing the cracks in his armor. Cracks he's not ready to deal with. So he blames the mirror instead of healing the wounds. Now let's be very clear. This doesn't make him a villain. It makes him unready. Jung believed that every person is on a path toward wholeness, a journey he called individuation. Some people are further along that path than others. Some are still stuck in denial, fear, or ego. And when two people meet, they don't just meet each other, they meet their mutual readiness. So when you offer love and he turns away, it doesn't always mean you love too much. It may mean he hasn't done the inner work to receive it. Your love isn't a flaw, it's a challenge. And not everyone is ready for that challenge. This is why some men only return after they've lost you. Because in your absence, the projection fades. And what's left is a strange emptiness, a sense that something important is missing. That something isn't just you. It's the part of themselves they saw in you and didn't appreciate when they had the chance. The tragedy, by the time they realize it, you've already evolved. You've already begun to pour that love back into yourself. And they're left with regret not just for losing you, but for losing a chance to meet themselves more fully. So no, he didn't leave because you were too much. He left because you were a mirror, a reflection of something he hadn't integrated. You offered him intimacy, but he hadn't yet befriended his own vulnerability. You offered truth, but he was still living in denial. You offered love, but he hadn't yet learned to love the parts of himself that your love awakened. And that is the hard, liberating truth. Sometimes a man can only grow in your absence. Sometimes your silence is what finally lets him hear his own soul. Sometimes the only way for him to see your value is for you to stop giving it so freely. Because real love isn't about convincing someone to choose you. It's about being willing to walk away when they can't. Not out of punishment, but out of wisdom, out of self-respect, out of the knowing that true intimacy requires mutual readiness, not just mutual desire. Jung taught us that love is not just a feeling. It is a confrontation, a mirror, a force that exposes what's real and what's missing. And when a man walks away from your love, it may be because he wasn't ready to see either. So let this be your reminder. You don't have to fight to be understood. You don't have to shrink to be accepted. You don't have to carry the burden of his unreadiness. Because sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is disappear, quietly, powerfully, without apology, and let him face the part of himself that only your absence can awaken. When someone begins to pull away from you, every fiber in your body wants to react. You want to text him. You want to explain. You want to clarify the misunderstanding you're sure must have happened. You replay every conversation, every word, looking for the moment he started to drift. Your instincts scream at you to fix it. But here's the truth that most people never tell you: your instincts, in this moment, will betray you. Carl Jung taught that our unconscious patterns often control our lives without us realizing it. And when we feel rejected, abandoned, or confused in love, we tend to default into those very patterns. We reach, we chase, we explain, we try harder. Not because we're weak, but because we're wired to seek connection and avoid the pain of separation. But ironically, the more you act from this unconscious place, the more you reinforce the very dynamic that's hurting you. Because when a man begins to retreat and you rush to close the gap, you send an unspoken message. You teach him that your worth is negotiable, that he can disappear and you will still be there, waiting, hoping, proving. It creates an imbalance. One person becomes the center, the other becomes a satellite, orbiting. He takes space, and you fill it. He becomes the chooser, and you become the chosen. And with every attempt to pull him closer, you lose a little more of yourself. So what do you do instead? You do the opposite. You stop chasing. You stop filling the space. You stop speaking when silence would serve you more. Not as a game, not to manipulate, but because true power comes from restraint. Imagine this. He pulls away. You notice. But instead of sending that message you drafted at 1 a.m., you sit with the discomfort. You breathe through the panic. You don't reach out. You don't try to fix what he has not even acknowledged as broken. And in that space, something extraordinary happens. You reclaim your center. You start to realize that just because someone disconnects does not mean you need to abandon yourself to bridge the distance. You stop reacting. You start observing. You see his behavior not as a reflection of your value, but as a mirror of his readiness. This is not easy. Your nervous system will scream. Your old patterns will flare. Your inner child might whisper that love must be earned. But Jung's work reminds us that the path of growth often begins with discomfort. He said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And this is one of those moments. A rite of passage. A threshold between who you were and who you are becoming. The urge to act is strong because doing something feels safer than doing nothing. Silence feels like surrender. But it's not. It's a statement. It's a declaration that you will not fight to be seen by someone who has closed their eyes. It's the refusal to become smaller just to hold on to someone who's already letting go. In this space of doing the opposite, something inside you begins to shift. Instead of proving your worth, you start embodying it. Instead of explaining your value, you live it. And people feel that. They sense when you're not chasing. They notice when your energy is no longer begging. And it disrupts the pattern. Jung wrote about a concept called enantiodromia, the tendency of things to turn into their opposites when pushed to extremes. In relationships, this shows up when your intensity becomes suffocating, not because you are too much, but because your constant pursuit removes the tension that allows desire to grow. By doing the opposite, by creating space, you allow him to come toward you of his own will, not out of guilt or pressure, but because he chooses to. This doesn't guarantee he will return. It doesn't promise a fairy tale ending. But that's not the point. The point is that you stop abandoning yourself for someone who hasn't shown they are willing to meet you halfway. You learn to stay rooted, even when the ground beneath the relationship begins to shift. This is maturity. This is individuation, the process Jung spoke of, where a person becomes whole, not through others, but through self-awareness. It's the process of seeing your own patterns, holding your impulses without obeying them, and choosing from clarity, not fear. When you act from reaction, you reinforce the old story. That love must be chased, that absence must be filled, that silence must be broken. But when you act from consciousness, you write a new story. One where your value is not based on someone else's presence. One where you can feel pain, but not be ruled by it. So the next time you feel the urge to reach out, to ask for answers, to beg for clarity, pause. Ask yourself, is this coming from love or fear? Is this an attempt to connect, or a way to avoid being with yourself? And most importantly, would acting now honor the woman you are becoming, or would it serve the little girl inside who's afraid of being left behind? Doing the opposite, doesn't mean shutting down. It means choosing wisely. It means trusting that you don't need to control the outcome to feel secure. It means letting life unfold and letting people reveal themselves, not based on how loudly you ask, but on how clearly you stand. You are not here to convince anyone of your worth. You are here to embody it. And sometimes that begins with silence, with restraint, with the courage to do nothing when your instincts scream to do something. And in that stillness, you will find not emptiness, but power. The kind of power that does not chase, the kind that does not beg, the kind that quietly says, I know who I am. And if you cannot see it, then perhaps you were never meant to. There comes a moment when the most powerful thing you can do is nothing, not out of apathy, but out of presence, not out of revenge, but out of truth. This is the moment of withdrawal, not to punish, but to reflect. This is what I call the withdrawal mirror. The withdrawal mirror is not a tactic, it's not a game, it's a psychological event. When someone has taken your energy for granted, when your love has become background noise to their life, your absence becomes louder than your presence ever was. And it is in that absence that they begin to see not just you but themselves, their choices, their patterns, their emptiness. And this confrontation is what most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Carl Jung spoke often about the mirror, that other people do not simply relate to us, they project onto us. They see in us what they have lost, what they long for, what they fear, and what they cannot face within themselves. And when you stay close, when you keep giving, when you explain and justify and reach and plead, you allow that projection to continue. They never have to look within, because you are always there to absorb the consequences of their avoidance. But when you step back with intention, when you remove your presence not in anger but in sovereignty, you become a mirror. A clean, silent, unavoidable mirror. And for the first time, they have to face themselves without distraction. Here's what that looks like. You stop checking their social media. Not because you don't care, but because watching them perform life while ignoring your worth no longer serves you. You stop responding immediately, if at all. Not to create anxiety, but to respect your time and your energy. You stop explaining. You stop defending. You stop offering your heart like a product they can sample whenever their ego feels hungry. And most of all, you stop showing up in spaces where you are not met with clarity, effort, or intention. This withdrawal is not a void. It's not silence for the sake of silence. It's an energy shift. It's the act of reclaiming everything you've been giving away without return. And the moment you pull back, the energetic field changes. You are no longer a giver on demand. You are no longer part of their comfort system. You are no longer accessible. And this shift forces a reckoning. Jung believed that transformation begins when projection breaks, when the illusion fades, when a person realizes that what they thought was about you was actually about them. But that can only happen when you stop feeding the illusion. The withdrawal mirror creates the space for this rupture. And in that rupture, something deeper is revealed. Now, let's be honest. This will not feel easy. You will be tempted to check in, to explain your absence, to send a final message for closure. But closure is not something they give you. It's something you give yourself. Every time you withhold that instinct to reach, you are choosing clarity over chaos. Every time you honor your own boundaries, you are telling your nervous system that it no longer needs to beg to be safe. There is a unique pain in loving someone who does not fully see you, and there is a deeper pain in continuing to show up for someone who never rises to meet you. The withdrawal mirror is how you break this pattern. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's deliberate, it's still, and it's terrifying to the person on the receiving end. Because here's what happens when you withdraw. They begin to feel the weight of your absence. Not just the logistics, not just the texts, the comfort, the validation, but the actual emotional safety you brought into their life. The calm, the patience, the kindness, the grounding, the belief in their potential, all of it disappears. And in its place, silence. That silence becomes a confrontation. It speaks louder than any message. It says, I no longer need you to see me. I no longer need your crumbs. I no longer require your permission to know my own value. And this is what pierces through the ego. This is what breaks through the armor. Not rage, not demand, but quiet certainty. Some people only realize what you were giving once it's gone. Some people only feel love in hindsight. And that is not your burden to carry. You were not sent here to teach someone how to value a good thing. You were sent here to become so deeply rooted in your own worth that your love becomes a privilege, not a pattern of rescue. The withdrawal mirror works because it interrupts the cycle. The pattern of give and take becomes disrupted. You stop playing the role. You stop showing up in the way that allows the dysfunction to continue. And when the pattern breaks, people must confront the part of themselves they've been avoiding. That's when growth becomes possible, not guaranteed, but possible. But let's be clear. The withdrawal mirror is not about waiting for them to come back. It's not about disappearing so they'll chase you. That's manipulation, and manipulation always collapses under truth. No, the withdrawal mirror is about you. It's about choosing peace over proximity, integrity over attention. It's about making your presence sacred again, not something they can access whenever it's convenient for them, but something they must earn through consistency, through awareness, through change. And maybe they won't come back. Maybe they won't notice. Maybe they'll blame you or pretend they never needed you. That's not failure. That's information. That's clarity. Because the person who refuses to meet your absence with reflection was never going to meet your presence with reverence. In the silence, you begin to remember who you are. You remember the version of yourself before the chasing, before the explaining, before the contorting. You remember that your love is not an obligation, it's a gift. You begin to rebuild your relationship with yourself. You fill the time you once spent worrying with practices that nourish you. You fill the space you once gave them with rituals of return to your body, your mind, your breath. You stop reaching, and instead, you receive from life, from stillness, from the knowing that the right person will never require you to disappear to be valued. The withdrawal mirror is not a tactic, it's a transformation. And not just for them, but for you. Because when you stop over-functioning, you discover how much energy you were leaking. When you stop over-explaining, you realize how little they were listening. When you stop over-loving, you see how much love you were withholding from yourself. Jung taught that healing begins with withdrawal. Not isolation, but introspection. A turning inward. A willingness to see not just the other, but ourselves, our patterns, our pain, our power. The withdrawal mirror is that turning point. It's where the story changes. Not because they finally understand, but because you finally do. So if you are in that space, know, if you're holding back the message, resisting the urge, reclaiming your energy, know this. You are not weak, you are not cruel, you are not giving up, you are returning to yourself. Returning to the center you abandoned in the name of love. And in that return, something sacred begins. A new story, a new pattern, a new way of being where your love is no longer a lifeline for someone else's avoidance, but a reflection of the wholeness you carry within. That is the power of the withdrawal mirror, not just in what it reveals to them, but in what it returns to you, your voice, your boundaries, your light, your peace. And in the end, that's what changes everything. Not the absence of someone else, but the presence of you. Fully, finally, unapologetically. Here, Carl Jung believed that transformation rarely happens through comfort. Real change is not born in moments of ease, but in disruption, in rupture, in the silence after something once familiar has gone missing. That silence, especially the kind left behind by someone who used to fill the emotional space, becomes the breeding ground for awakening. When you withdraw, when you disappear from someone's life not as an act of cruelty but as a declaration of self-worth, you create an opening. And in that opening, something begins to stir, not always immediately, not always consciously, but eventually, the loss begins to speak. Jung understood that the human psyche does not evolve by intellectual realization alone. It evolves through impact, through shock, through the collapse of what we thought was secure. And in relationships, Nothing delivers that shock more effectively than the sudden absence of someone we took for granted. Your disappearance is not a passive event. It is an energetic rupture. It removes the scaffolding they were leaning on and forces them to stand on their own. And when they can't, they begin to ask questions, not about you, but about themselves. In Jungian terms, this is the confrontation with the shadow. When your presence shielded him from the parts of himself he didn't want to face, he was comfortable. Maybe he relied on your emotional labor, your forgiveness, your patience. But now that you're gone, the mirror breaks. The projection fades. What's left is a raw, unsettling encounter with what has been buried: his fears, his insecurities, his wounds. And for the first time, there's no one else to carry them. Your absence becomes the catalyst for inner reckoning. Jung called this process individuation. It is the slow, often painful journey of becoming whole, of integrating the rejected, forgotten, or unconscious parts of ourselves into a cohesive identity. But individuation doesn't begin in harmony. It begins in crisis, in the breakdown of a story. And your disappearance forces that story to break. The story he told himself about who he is, what he wants, what he deserves, all of it starts to unravel. He is no longer the person who had you. He is now the person who lost you. And that distinction matters because it creates space. Space for reflection, space for accountability, space for emotional growth. When someone who once had consistent access to your care, your attention, your energy, suddenly finds that access revoked, they are left with only one option: face themselves. Not in theory, but in practice. They begin to notice the silence in their phone, the absence of warmth in their routine, the cold distance in their emotional field. And this discomfort has a voice. It whispers truths they never wanted to hear, about how they showed up, about what they avoided, about the gap between who they were and who they thought they were. This is the awakening Jung spoke of, a moment when the unconscious becomes conscious, not through choice, but through necessity. Pain, in this case, becomes the teacher, not because you wanted them to suffer, but because you stopped shielding them from the natural consequences of their actions. You stopped softening the impact, and in doing so, you returned their lessons to them. It's important to understand that not everyone will respond to this awakening the same way. Some will resist. Some will deflect. Some will try to fill the void with distractions. But others, especially those with even a trace of emotional depth, will begin to feel something unfamiliar and undeniable. Regret. Not just for losing you, but for not recognizing what you were trying to offer, for not listening, for not growing while they had the chance. Jung believed that we are all drawn to experiences and relationships that reveal us to ourselves. Every person you meet plays a role in your inner evolution. Some come to support, some to challenge, some to wound, and some to awaken. And sometimes you are the one who awakens another, not through your presence, but through your exit. Your disappearance marks the end of a cycle of being undervalued, overlooked, emotionally drained. But for them, it marks the beginning of something else, the slow, quiet birth of awareness. And like all births, it comes with pain. The realization that they mistook love for convenience, that they confused availability with obligation, that they saw your loyalty as something guaranteed rather than something earned. And when this realization truly lands, it changes people. It humbles them. It cracks their defenses. It opens their eyes. Maybe not enough to win you back. Maybe not enough to undo the damage, but enough to start their own work. Enough to question their own patterns. Enough to ask, for the first time, who they have become. And whether they admit it or not, they will remember you, not just as someone who cared, but as someone who dared to leave, as someone who drew the line, as someone who chose themselves. Your silence becomes their echo. Your absence becomes their mirror. And Jung was right: mirrors do not flatter. They reflect. They show the truth, whether we're ready to see it or not. But this isn't just about them. It's about you too. Because in choosing to disappear, in stepping back from someone who would not meet you with presence, you awakened something in yourself as well. Your own strength, your own voice, your own standards. You stopped making excuses. You stopped shrinking. You stopped compromising your truth in the name of connection. And in that act, you stepped into a new identity, not the version of you that waits, but the version of you that walks. This is where the deeper healing begins. Not in being chosen, but in choosing. Not in being needed, but in being aligned. Not in being chased, but in being at peace with letting go. Jung believed that wholeness is not perfection. It is integration. It is the ability to hold both love and loss, desire and detachment, longing and boundaries, without collapsing into either extreme. So if you're wondering whether your disappearance mattered, whether it created any shift, know this. Real change often starts in the dark, in the absence, in the stillness. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for another soul is to leave them with the space to meet themselves. Not everyone will rise, but that's not your responsibility. Your only job is to be the mirror. And once that mirror has done its work, you move forward not because you were not enough, but because you finally realized you were never meant to stay small just to make someone else comfortable. And that, more than anything, is what wakes people up. Not the pain of rejection, but the pain of recognition. The pain of seeing themselves clearly, maybe for the first time, through the space you created by stepping away. That is the true awakening. And sometimes it only begins when you are no longer there. There are certain things women do in the name of love, care, and connection that seem right in the moment, but slowly chip away at their value in the eyes of the person they love. These actions don't come from weakness. They come from conditioning, from stories told since childhood, from a culture that celebrates self-sacrifice, but punishes self-respect. And if no one ever told you this before, let it be said now. Constantly giving more is not what makes someone love you. Sometimes, it's the very thing that makes them take you for granted. The first way women lose value is by over-explaining their worth. You feel him pulling away, so you try to talk him back in. You tell him how much you've given. You remind him of everything you've done. You write long texts trying to make him understand. But in doing so, you unknowingly reinforce a dynamic where your value is tied to his recognition. You teach him that your self-worth depends on his validation. The truth is, people rarely change because of how well you explain yourself. They change when they feel the consequence of not showing up. And that consequence is your silence, your absence, your refusal to over-explain what should already be clear. The second mistake is being too available. At first, your availability seems like love. You always pick up the phone. You answer right away. You shift your schedule to fit his. You cancel your plans when he calls. It feels generous. It feels loyal. But over time, it sends a different message. It tells him that your time is not your own, that you are always on standby, waiting for his attention. Mystery fades. Energy becomes imbalanced. And what once felt like devotion begins to feel like obligation. Relationships thrive not on constant access, but on mutual respect for space and individuality. When you are always available, you lose the power of presence. The third way is by ignoring patterns and making excuses. You see the signs, mixed messages, disrespect, lack of effort, but instead of holding him accountable, you rationalize. You say he's just stressed, that he's afraid of intimacy, that he doesn't know how to express himself. You start doing the emotional labor not only for yourself, but for him too. But the more excuses you make, the more blind you become to the truth. That someone who wants to show up will. Someone who respects you won't require a translation. Someone who values you won't leave you guessing. And when you stop naming patterns for what they are, you give them permission to continue. The fourth is trying to prove you're worthy by fixing, saving, or healing him. This is one of the most common and painful traps. You see his wounds, and instead of asking whether he's willing to heal them, you take on the role of healer. You become the emotional caretaker, the rescuer, The one who sees his potential and believes in him more than he believes in himself. But here's the hard truth. No one transforms because someone else loves them hard enough. People transform when they choose to. Your love cannot do the work for him. And the longer you stay in the role of the savior, the more he sees you as someone who exists to manage his pain, not as someone who deserves to be met in full. The fifth way is begging for clarity instead of embodying your own. You ask him what he wants, where this is going, if he still feels the same. And while those questions are valid, they often come from a place of seeking reassurance rather than seeking truth. But real clarity doesn't come from their answers. It comes from your own awareness. How are they showing up? Are you growing or shrinking in their presence? Are your needs met or constantly postponed? The moment you stop outsourcing clarity and begin honoring your own feelings, you stop asking someone to define your worth. You start walking in alignment with it. Many women also lose value by refusing to set boundaries. You let things slide. You allow repeated behaviors that hurt you. You tell yourself it's not a big deal. That love requires compromise. And while love does require flexibility, it does not require self-abandonment. Every time you ignore your own boundary, you teach your nervous system that safety doesn't matter. You teach the other person that they can overstep without consequence. Boundaries are not walls. They are gates. They teach others how to love you. And they teach you how to love yourself in practice, not just theory. Another subtle way women diminish their value is by confusing consistency with loyalty. You stay because you've invested time, because you've seen glimpses of who he could be, because you believe in the story of potential. But the cost is your peace, your energy, your joy. Loyalty is not noble when it becomes loyalty to dysfunction. Being consistent in a space that is inconsistent in return is not strength, it is a form of self-betrayal. You are not responsible for proving that you can endure. You are responsible for honoring what you deserve. There's also the tendency to apologize for having needs. You downplay your desires. You silence your preferences. You call yourself too sensitive or too much because someone made you feel that way. But the moment you treat your needs as a burden, others will too. Jung taught that wholeness includes honoring all parts of the self, not just the strong, quiet, easy-to-love parts, but the vulnerable, the emotional, the longing. Your needs are not inconvenient. They are sacred indicators of where love must rise to meet you. Finally, the biggest way women lose value is by abandoning themselves while staying with someone who has already let go. You sense the shift. You feel the disconnect. You know he's no longer emotionally present. But instead of facing that truth, you try harder. You love louder. You give more, hoping that if you just do one more thing, he will return to you. But here is the truth. No one wants to say out loud, the longer you stay where you are not met, the more you disconnect from yourself. And in trying to hold on to them, you lose the very relationship that matters most, the one with your own soul. This is not about blame. It's about awakening. It's about realizing that the behaviors we've been taught to associate with love often have nothing to do with love at all. Real love doesn't ask you to perform. It doesn't require endless justification. It doesn't thrive in imbalance. It honors presence, respects boundaries, meets needs, and grows in mutual effort. You do not gain value by giving more than you receive. You do not earn love by proving how much you can endure. You do not become worthy by waiting to be chosen. You are already worthy, already whole, already enough. The task is not to convince anyone of that truth. The task is to stop doing the things that make you forget it, and to start living in a way that reflects it every choice, every boundary, every silence, every goodbye. That is how you rise. Not by being more for them, but by being fully, unapologetically, and completely you. You were never left behind. You were never forgotten. What happened was not abandonment. It was redirection. What felt like rejection was, in truth, a release. And you may not have seen it then, but every step away from what didn't serve you was a step towards something far greater. You were not being cast aside. You were being chosen. Chosen by life. chosen by your own growth, chosen by the part of you that refused to settle for anything less than real, conscious, mutual love. There is a profound difference between being left and being led. When someone pulls away, it is easy to spiral into self-doubt, to wonder what you lacked, what you did wrong, why you were not enough. But pause for a moment and consider this. What if this was not about your inadequacy, but about your alignment? What if this rupture was never meant to define your worth, but to reveal it? Carl Jung once said that we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The end of a relationship, the fading of attention, the silence after connection, these are not merely losses, they are portals. They are invitations to go inward and remember what you forgot the moment you started trying too hard to be loved. You forgot that you are not here to be chosen by someone who cannot see you. You are here to remember that you have always had the right to choose yourself. You are not a consolation prize. You are not a second thought. You are not the background character in someone else's coming-of-age story. You are the center. You are the story. And when you finally stop waiting for someone to pick you, and instead pick yourself, the world around you begins to shift. Let this moment mark a turning point. Let it be the chapter where the narrative changes. Not because someone came back, not because they finally realized, but because you did. You realized that you do not have to earn what is already yours, that your presence is powerful, that your boundaries are sacred, that your voice matters, and that your love, when given from a place of wholeness, is not just beautiful, it is transformative. So if this message speaks to you, if you feel something stirring in your chest, know that you are not alone. You are part of a quiet revolution. A movement of souls choosing depth over performance, truth over comfort, and self-respect over settling. And if you are still walking through the silence, still holding your own heart in your hands, I see you. You are not invisible. You are becoming. This is not the end. It is a beginning, a return, a rising. And if today is the day you finally understand that you were never left, you were being chosen, then hold on to that truth. Let it guide you. Let it shape every new standard, every new relationship, every new step. You are not here to beg for love. You are here to embody it. And those who are meant for you will recognize it. Not because you shouted, but because you stood tall in your silence. Because you walked with grace. Because you no longer make yourself small to be accepted. And if this journey resonates with you, if this truth feels like something you have needed to hear, take a moment to acknowledge it. Speak it aloud. Share it with someone who may be walking the same path. This is how we heal. Not in isolation, but together. By witnessing one another in our becoming. By choosing not just ourselves, but also the world we are creating through that choice. The world where love is no longer earned through suffering. It is received through presence, through clarity, through truth. And you, right now, are part of that world. Not because someone else said so, but because you finally decided it for yourself. You are not being left behind. You are being called forward. Step into it. You're ready.